Today we're going to recycle some discarded metal pieces into furniture. Every once in a while when I'm driving around the desert of Joshua Tree, I'll notice some discarded metal objects. I drove by this old rusted muffler a few times before finally deciding to pick it up. I wasn't sure what I was going to make with it yet, but I was curious what's inside, so I used my angle grinder to cut it open. The outer shell actually consisted of two different layers of metal. The outer one is pretty thin and came right off, and I used a screwdriver and pliers to peel back the second layer. Inside I found a series of pipes and some inner walls along with some really nasty steel wool. All this is used to damper the sound from an automobile. At this point I was thinking I could make a pretty cool hanging planter if I could figure out a way to cut and remove the insides. So I switched back and forth between cutting out the insides with either an angle grinder or a reciprocating saw. They both work well for cutting steel, they just have different shaped blades, so the reciprocating saw is easier for getting into tighter spaces, but the angle grinder is easier to make nice, straight, controlled cuts. There was quite a bit of rust on the muffler, so I tried two different ways to remove it. I used a wire brush on an angle grinder, and then I also tried this stripping disc that fits right onto a cordless drill. Both methods worked quite well, so I would just recommend using the one that you're most comfortable with. I used an angle grinder with a flap disc to smooth over the rough cut edges of the steel. The two layers of metal for the muffler were kind of flapping a little bit, so I drilled some holes and then used a pull riveter to hold them together. This is a really easy and inexpensive way to connect things, and it has a nice industrial look. The inside was pretty dirty, so I just used a pressure washer to rinse it out. Once the metal was dry, I sprayed the whole thing with Rustoleum Rusty Metal Primer. Now I had a nice, consistent, protective primer coat that I could do the finish paint over the top of. Now the muffler had a couple holes in either end, so I cut a plywood plug using a hole saw and then glued in a piece of dowel to fill in the hole that the hole saw makes. I sealed the wood with 3 coats of a clear acrylic sealer. The other hole in the muffler goes in quite deep and isn't visible from the outside, so for this one I just cut a piece of plastic from the top of the spray paint can so that it would fit right in. I used my hot glue gun to glue these plugs in place and seal around the edges. Construction adhesive or silicone caulk would work for this as well. I cut a piece of dowel just a little bit longer than the muffler and drilled holes in either side of it. I took some 1/4-inch rope, wrapped it around the ends of the muffler, and then stuck those ends through the holes that I drilled in the dowel. I screwed these metal brackets to the wall. They're meant for closet organizers and they have a hook on them for hanging a clothes rod. I hung the planter and then tied knots on the ends of the rope to keep the rope from sliding through the holes. Now this planter doesn't have drainage holes, so I put a layer of gravel at the bottom. This will create a drainage layer that will allow excess water to filter through the soil. Now I travel a lot, so I chose some low maintenance succulents to fill up the planter. I really like the contrast between the glossy yellow metal and the soft white of the cotton rope. On another trip I saw this stove on the side of the road. Now the insides had all been ripped out and I didn't have enough room in the car to take the whole thing, but I did take the bottom drawer. This stamped sheet metal is pretty thin and flimsy, so we cut a piece of plywood that will fit inside to reinforce it. The inside had these interior fins that were used to attach the drawer parts, so we just marked the lines on the piece of plywood and then did some plunge cuts with the circular saw. A drill and jigsaw could be used to achieve the same thing. The inside edges of the metal were curved, so we rounded over the edges of the plywood using an orbital sander. We used some 150 grit sandpaper to scuff up the paint just a little bit, and then cleaned the whole piece of metal with some acetone. We then applied 3 coats of this Rustoleum spray paint in a nice teal. I used white spray paint to coat these 16-inch long hairpin legs. Now driving screws isn't particularly difficult, but there's times when you only have one hand available and you need the screw to stick to the head of the driver. And that's where the magnet driver system, which is the sponsor for this video, comes in handy. You can get these little magnetic sleeves that slide over your driving bits and they'll hold the screw firmly to the head of the bit. This is really convenient because you don't have to hold the screw steady with your fingers while you drive it. The magnet drivers come in a kit with all different attachments, but they also work with your existing bits as well. It's a really handy system that I would recommend to both beginners and experts, but check it out for yourself. I'll put a link in the description box below. With 2 layers of protective paint, these projects will hold up really well against the desert sun, and I'm excited about using them in the new home that I'm building. Next time you're at a thrift store, a junkyard, or just driving around, be on the lookout for old discarded pieces of metal. For more information, check out our website, and if you want to see what we're working on next, be sure to follow us on Instagram. Check out some of our other metalworking for beginners projects, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Thanks! Bye!